So we will start with the first panel session of the afternoon, which will be about the psychological consequences of war. And as you understand, this will be also highly Ukraine related. So the first speaker this afternoon is Professor Jana Yevashvili from Georgia. She is a psychologist working at the Ilia State University in Tbilisi, long-lasting expertise in the field of trauma, also working with the Tbilisi office of the Federation Global Initiative on Psychiatry. She was president of the European Society for Traumatic Stress Studies from 1919 to 2020 and is on the board now of several other trauma-related organizations. Jana, the floor is yours.
Robert. Good afternoon. That's an honor for me to have an opportunity to speak at Andrei Sakharov's 12th conference. So, no, I have microphone. Is it better now? Yeah. So it's remote mic. So the topic of my presentation is war and how it impacts mental health, but also psychosocial well-being, but also psychopolitical life of the society. So as I told Imke just right now, it's pretty eclectic. So I'm starting actually by story of me being in Sri Lanka last week. That's also GIP Federation project, helping Sri Lankan mental health professionals to build up services there, trauma care services. And at the very beginning of our training, my Sri Lankan colleagues asked me, do we have anything in common? So that was kind of tricky question, reflecting power struggle between the trainees and trainers. So actually, we found out that in spite of we are different countries, different continents, different cultures, everything differs between us. But there is a strong link between us, very much in common. That's post-war society, or even society in war. Oops, sorry. So, and what is it about? That's about multiple losses. That's, I would say, the cardinal feature of post-war society or the society in war. Because you are dealing with a lot of losses, losses of lives, loss of belongings, basic assumptions. Am I worthy? Am I actually okay? Or I am powerless, or I am helpless, or I'm probably guilty because I survived and others not. So a lot of basic assumptions are shattered about my own self, about the world. Social roles, if a person is a refugee or IDP, he probably was a school teacher at his home country, and in the new society, he's a taxi driver or she's a taxi driver. So then identity crisis starts. Who am I then? A lot of things actually. And I would like to quote to the Chilean economist Manfred Maxneff, who actually states that the Maslow pyramid of basic human needs is just outdated because it speaks about hierarchical relationships between the basic human needs, while the basic human needs are absolutely equal to each other, and that's subsistence, protection, affection, participation, understanding, creation, recreation, freedom, and identity. And they were the same during the whole history of mankind. But the satisfiers differed because, for example, in the past, satisfier for ID card probably slow, yeah. Satisfier for ID card probably was totemian name of a person like Chingachgook the Great Snake, but nowadays we are having just ID cards. What actually I like in Max Neff's theory is that he is stating that there are no bad or wrong basic human needs. Nobody wants war, but there are wrong satisfiers. So among satisfiers, he is actually pointing to false satisfiers. And for example, hyperprotective mother, he tries her child to be well, but actually she hinders his or her identity need satisfaction or freedom, basic human need satisfaction. But even worse is war as such, as a destructive, catastrophic satisfier, which actually hinders or prevents satisfaction of any human needs. And that's what war is about. Sorry, again, I went wrong direction. So my presentation will describe war as a catastrophic stressor. Then I will speak about war-related psychopolitical malignant developments and will discuss a case of Russia, some aspects of current psychopolitical developments in Russia. Then I will touch upon war-related mental health problems and psychosocial problems in post-war societies, and I will try to finish with resilience, not to be pessimistic. So before I will move to the description of war as a catastrophic stressor, I would like to distinguish between natural catastrophes and man-made catastrophes, which makes a huge difference, because in case of natural catastrophes, actually that's nature, or probably we explain it as a God's will, and we don't have persecutor. But in case of man-made catastrophes, the society might be trapped in a victim-aggressor bystanders triangle, and actually move from one angle to another. And I was actually, it was very indicative for me that Mikhail spoke about those who might think of themselves in Russia as victims. Now they are in the role of aggressor if they are identifying themselves with the state. But if they are moving to another angle of the triangle, to victim's angle, then they are still trapped into victim-aggressor bystander triangle, which is very destructive and which does not give a chance to heal the society. Here I am going just briefly describe war-related stressors, and you know very well without even showing you that that's killings, that's bombings and shellings and explosions and captivity and robbery. So a lot of stressors which make war actually catastrophe, disaster, a disaster, which affects primary victims, of course, but also their relatives and friends, then the whole community, rescue and recovery personnel, incidental others or others upset by the disaster. Even many here probably are affected in some way by ongoing war, and indirectly involved persons. So that's the whole cycle actually affected. And during war times, we all are affected, especially in the countries where war is ongoing. And this makes post-war trauma or war-related trauma very easy way to manipulate with the political and socio-political life in particular societies. And here I would like to bring example of Putin's Russia. Just some aspects of the political situations there. How actually political propaganda prepared war mentality within Russian population. That's one of the demonstrations dedicated to May 9th. That's how it goes usually in Russia in the last years, especially after 2015. Putin is an unhealthy political leader. So in the hands of unhealthy political leader, historical trauma might turn into some malignant political developments. So every May 9th is celebrated in the country, which gives us feelings that World War II is used to shape national identity of the Russian population. And collapse of the Soviet Union is considered as a catastrophe, and that's a shared trauma of the population. And the victory in the Great Patriotic War is kind of a shared glory for the nation to be proud of. So this phenomena of shared trauma and shared glory are very well described in the psychological literature to create actually feeling of being victims, feeling of being entitled to victimize others as we are victims. Yeah. So mobilization against Nazis, because the World War II became a topic which exists in the presence in Russian mentality. It is not in the past anymore. Due to actually, for example, just a few examples. That's children's fashion shows, and they are very proud to wear military clothes of 40s. And since 2017, for example, Russian Minister of Defense Shoigu introduced actually military uniform of 40s instead of the contemporary modern military uniform. And they are calling it actually the military uniform of winners, the winners' uniforms. And very soon after that, in 2017, he just abolished the gray military uniform for Russian military personnel, which they were wearing when they were in civil settings, yeah, in town, yeah, not at the military bases, because war started to be everyday reality of the Russian people. And I would like also to demonstrate this. Actually, from 2000s, Putin started to initiate it, actually, so-called National Program for the Patriotic Education of Citizens of the Russian Federation. And this program is implemented by action plans for every 5 years. And actually, a lot to say about this program. That's the case for separate analysis. But I just quote to the 2018 conference on the National Conference of Patriotic Education. And I'm just quoting here some titles of the presentations to show time collapse within the Russian society. So, missile artillery on the Voronezh front during the battle to protect Kursk. That's one title of the presentation. Another one is the Kursk Arc is a battle of technology and the soul, its importance for the patriotic upbringing of Russian youth of 21st century. Then, in the actually another presentation, in the letters of the soldiers of the Great Patriotic War, daily facts, thoughts, and feelings of military life. So that's actually about youth, but we can also bring example of how patriotic upbringing is going on in the kindergartens. And Tom, can we please switch on the video?
Старинную книгу мы вновь открываем. И в прошлое с вами, друзья,
We're opening this book again in order to get back into our past. And we recall that summer day and the music playing in the park. Citizens of the Soviet Union, today at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Authentic voice of the Yuri Levitan, the famous radio commentator during the war.
The great patriotic war of the Soviet people has begun. The war against the Nazi invaders.
And they are just accompanying him and, yeah, wishing good fight. Some are crying. Okay, we can stop here actually. So that's very typical kindergarten play of 2015. It started when Russia was celebrating 70th anniversary of the World War II. So that's how actually I am speaking of how the time collapse happened in Russia, and of course it's very natural that within this context, Putin's rating is going up whenever he attacks somebody. So here is showing after attack on Chechnya, then his rating goes down. Then after attacking Georgia in 2008, his rating goes up. Then again, rating goes down. And then after attack of and annexation of Crimea and Donetsk, etc., Lugansk, his rating goes up. And now also it's on its rise. So then it's not actually surprising what is going on. Yeah. So that's the whole system of psychopolitical processes which are leading to the nowadays development. And of course, it's so tragic to realize that one pathological leader can actually catalyze this kind of malignant developments because what are the costs? And now I'm going to speak about the costs. Oops, sorry. Speak about costs. So that's from Georgian study. We studied our war-affected population, both IDPs and those who are living on the current conflict border. And you can see here that prevalence of mental health problems is quite high. Especially I would point to PTSD prevalence, and in comparison with 3.9 cross-national prevalence, which is from the recent study of our colleagues. Yeah, you can see that that's many times more. And very interesting graph is here, which shows that out of those who are having and experiencing mental health problems, only 1/4 seeks for help. And actually, up to 19.6% know that they have mental health problems and they are not seeking for help. But there is also more than 50% of war-affected population who experience mental health symptoms, mental health problems, severe, sometimes 3 mental health conditions together, but they are not aware that they are having mental health problems and they need help. So that's also about normalizing to live with the bad quality of life. That's normalization of feeling embittered. Probably Dr. Andreas Merker will mention tomorrow embitterment, I don't know. But yeah, that's his term. So population experiences mental health problems, but sometimes in more than 50% of cases not aware about it. And that's a study which we've done in Ukraine in 2016. We actually made a nationwide epidemiological study of Ukrainian internally displaced people. And you can also see here scale of mental health problems. Again, depression symptoms, anxiety, somatization of symptoms, PTSD, 21%, and actually 74% of participants who actually experience mental health problems, they actually do not receive appropriate support. And probably that's a bridge to Robert Van More's presentation, where he will speak about how we try to respond to these needs. But that's just one dimension of the problem, because collective trauma is also there. And mental health problems, that's just one dimension. Collective processes are probably even more dramatic or tragic. And I will not go in depth on this topic, but I will just quote, for example, a quote from the storytelling session with the Georgian IDP children. So they were doing story about leaves in the autumn, so neutral subject, but they are saying that nobody needs us. Today we fall down from the trees, tomorrow people will come gather us in a heap and burn us. So that's about their perception, what people will do with them. Yeah, they are not needed. Or that's also from the IDP community's entrance. Children installed this note. They are saying on the note, before you enter, think whether you are needed here or not. So that's also very indicative of their tuning of mind due to their traumatic experiences. And there is an IDP folklore, internally displaced people's folklore in Georgia, which actually speaks about being forced to leave their home country, being in exile, suffering, and actually being oppressed. And usually children who are already born in exile and they never witnessed war, they are singing about it and they are very dramatically performing this kind of folk songs, which means that they are inheriting it with, they are absorbing trauma with mother's milk. And then we can speak about, that's about vertical transmission of trauma, but horizontal transmission trauma is not a viral disease. There is no trauma virus, but there is horizontal transmission of trauma. For example, those children who witnessed death of their family members on a very difficult Caucasian range road from Abkhazia to the rest of Georgia, actually they were playing traumatic game in the beginning of 21st century. Actually, they were killing small animals, hedgehogs, mice, birds, and they were performing burial ceremonies in our very cultural, very dramatic and tragic style. And local children were also involved and actually not normal children's play is full of joy, but here it was horrors type of emotions. But there is a resilience, of course, because, for example, I am showing on this left side picture, that's what the government of Georgia actually organized as village for IDPs. You see, it's more reminds of a military base. But here, after several years, IDPs succeeded to make it a green village. Yeah, that symbolizes resilience capacity. And in case of Ukraine, I admire resilience which Ukrainian people are exposing nowadays. So they became kind of a role model for the rest of the world. So that is it. I think that's what I was going to speak about today. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jana. We will have some time afterwards, I think, to put questions. But I now first would like to ask if we can see the first clip. I will shortly explain before you put it on. So we have been making clips last year for a program that I will talk about later, a psychological aid to human rights defenders and political activists in Belarus who had psychological consequences of the repression. And so the clips were made by a Ukrainian filmmaker, Lesia Harchenko. And coincidentally, out of the 6 clips that we made, 5 were made in Ukraine because she is based in Kiev, and so it was the easiest to make them there. And so this got a very different connotation, of course, when the war started. So the first clip that I want to show you is a clip that we made about the relatives of people that disappeared in the LNR and DNR, the so-called People's Republics in the East. Can we have this clip?
Арма, иди сюда. Иди сюда. Иди сюда. Ой-ой-ой.
син контрактник. У 2015 році 9 лютого попав під обстріл, під Дебальцево. На машині УАЗ-469. Віз полковників, майора. І з тих пір ми його шукаємо. Знаємо, що він живий, нам дали документи, що він в заручниках. Надіємося, що він буде вдома. І дуже скоро.
У 2014 році, влітку, коли почалися події на сході України, мій брат пішов добровольцем, записався до батальйону «Донбас», який тоді скликали на Майдані. 29-го під час виходу з котла Іловайського, коли був об'явлений зелений коридор, він зник. І ми почали наводити довідки всюди, цікавитися, опитувати свідків, хлопців, які вийшли, які були поранені. І були різні версії, декілька версій, що з ним могло трапитися. Але ми продовжували вірити, що він живий, що його могли взяти в полон. І, власне, досі ми так вважаємо.
27 числа він позвонив мені вранці, серпень місяць, 14 рік, сказав, що виходить на завдання, ввечері обов'язково зателефонує і більше не позвонив. Троє попало в полон, Роман із командиром своїм і ще з одним побратимом. На сьогодні у мене є тільки інформація, що Худина Максима і біленького Романа довший час утримували в Лефортово, судили закритими судами, дали великий термін, і де вони відбувають покарання, на жаль, невідомо.
Фізично це дуже тяжко. Сняться сни, що він йде додому. У мене піднявся цукор, нервова система зорвана. Кожного нема такого дня, щоб ми не думали, щоб ми вставали і лягали не з тим, коли наш синочок з'явиться додому. Але знаємо точно, що він буде.
Ну, це досить великий стрес і депресивний стан, але я не могла собі дозволити дуже розкисати, тому що в мене батько. У нас батько вже дуже похилого віку, 83 роки. Я йому сказала через 3 тижні тільки. Це був дуже великий стрес, я з ним говорила 4 години, він не міг з цим змиритися. І з того часу я його весь час підтримую в вірі, в надії на те, що брат повернеться.
Це стан такого страшного вакууму на самому початку, коли ти не можеш зібрати докупи ні своїх думок, ні своїх відчуттів. Тебе переслідує страшний переляк, бо ти розумієш, що твоя дитина попала в руки нелюдів. А ми до того часу вже начиталися про катування, про знущання. І всякий раз, коли я відкривала очі, своїми ногами зникала земля.
Во-первых, віра, все на світі. Во-вторых, допомагають наші діти. Наш старший син теж пройшов Донецький аеропорт. Він знає всі, як все відбувається, як це важко, все на світі. Він допомагає дуже. Допомагаючи, ми звертаємося по всіх інстанціях, де тільки можна.
Спочатку було тяжко, вони розуміли, оточуючи нашу позицію. Вони казали, це ж очевидно. Поки я не познайомилася з такими самими дівчатами, жінками, матерями, сестрами, дружинами, які виявилися такі ж божевільні, як я. І після цього ми почали з ними спілкуватися, зустрічатися, підтримувати одне одного. І це нам допомогло пережити цей стрес. Допомагає досі.
У нас є така громадська організація тепер, мам. Вона називається «Надія». Ми одна другій даруємо надію. І тримаємось, як можемо. І я мусила збирати себе докупи. Я пам'ятала приклад своєї бабуні, яка Другу світову війну втратила 5 дітей. Я мусила жити, я знала, що мій син, він громадянин, він чоловік, він воїн, він захисник, він вибрав таку дорогу, а я мушу його підтримати, якщо не словом, то молитвою.
Не здаватися, прежде всього, не здаватися, тільки воювати. І не вірить отим всяким глуздим, я не знаю, як навіть виразитися, ви знаєте, коли кажуть, ви знаєте, ви нічого не доб'єтеся. Да ні, доб'ємося. Ви знаєте, у нас велика команда, у нас є надія. У нас є мами такі, з котрими ми збираємося в Червоному Хресті міжнародному, ви знаєте. І коли ми обговорюємо ці всі питання, ви знаєте, ми такі всі солідарні, то ми всі сильні. От я вважаю так, що оці мами всі дуже сильні. І я думаю, що ми доб'ємося все одно, і наших дітей віддадуть нам.
Найбільше допомагає, коли тебе розуміють. Такі самі люди, як ти. Тобто стороннім людям пояснити неможливо. А тим людям, які пережили те саме, що і я, ми знаходимо з ними одна в одній підтримку, і ми розуміємо одна одного.
У кожного своя дорога. Мами повинні розуміти, що раз вони народили хлопчика, і він виріс, він залишається її дитиною, але він чоловік. І його покликання – це захист. Захистити дитину, захистити людину, захистити свою державу. І мами повинні розуміти, що єдине, що вони можуть зробити, це тільки підтримати його.
I would now like to give the floor to Imke Hansen. She is a lecturer in East European history and, like me, very interested and involved in oral history. Historian, trauma specialist, and she just arrived from Ukraine yesterday, where she is working on the consequences of war. Imke.
Thank you very much for the brief introduction. And what I'm going to speak about today is very much connecting to the speakers who were speaking before me, already before lunch. Because as Robert said, I just came back from Ukraine, and I'm actually working in Ukraine. Like I started working in Ukraine in 2015, more as an oral historian, as a person who is advising people who are doing documentation of human rights crimes, how they can do it without re-traumatizing the person they interview. That's how it all started. And then I got stuck in Ukraine in working with people on stress resilience, on trauma, on how to talk to each other in families, on how to live in war conditions. I'm based in Severodonetsk, and my organization has 2 more offices in Kiev and Mariupol. This all is, of course, not accessible for us now. And what I was doing, what I was doing in the past year or in the past years was basically training with people in the east and frontline Ukraine, which means Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, And what you see here is you see teenagers, you see teachers, you see police officers, you see people who are in touch with a lot of conflict and with a lot of problems. And we were working with them. We made a comic. What you can see it in the corner, and we're using that comic about stress and trauma as a manual. And as I said, we're based in Sverdlovsk, but we're traveling to other frontline cities. And I have been mainly working in Stanica Luhanska, Shastia, Popasna, Troizbenka, and Zalatoye. Now, like after the full-scale invasion, my work has changed a lot. Like, of course, we have lost our offices and we have lost everything we had in there, including our personal items. And now frontline Ukraine, which was limited to Donetsk and Luhansk region for us, is everywhere. And the tasks that we face are very different. And I would like to give you like a short overview. And the photos you see and the observations that I share with you are basically from the last 2 weeks, where I was in Ukraine. I was doing trainings in Uzhhorod and Lviv, and I was on a monitoring mission with my organization, with Vostok SOS and Libereco, and with the DRA in Chernivskaya Oblast and Sumskaya Oblast, in the villages that were under occupation and are now liberated again. So one very strong factor that is very much associated to mental health, mental problems, trauma, is the displacement. Displacement, we heard before, more than 5 million refugees in other countries, but more than 7 million internal displaced persons, in like refugees who are in Ukraine. In a country with a completely different life standard than Western countries, and with not enough infrastructure in the West to actually like support all these people. So infrastructure is under strain. People are living in shelters under like very improvised conditions and without any privacy. So they're sharing classrooms with other families. Families mostly consist of women, of course. Like men are usually like either they're above 55 or 60, or they're not there. The next factor you have is, of course, the immense destruction. So many people have lost their houses. They're living in very often in the same villages. They're living with neighbors, with friends, with family. And as you see, they're like standing in front of their houses with no possibility to build it up. Very often they still wait for the documentation through the state. Before that, they cannot clean it up and they cannot like build up anything. They're waiting to get resources, and most of them know that the perspective that they can build things up and make it their home again are not great and very long term. Also, it severely affects you if you're living in a city that is so destroyed. Like if you're seeing wherever you go, wherever you look at, you see destruction. Like the good thing is, and that's what all the people said, like at least it's spring now. It was much worse to cope with it in March, but now it's spring and everything is blossoming, like cherries and apples, and really everything is blossoming. So everywhere you have this contrast of destroyed houses and facilities and blossoming trees around it. Another problem is that you have, like even with the houses where you have like not full destruction, you have mining, like the ground was mined, you have mines, and you have shells everywhere, like these very, very small, sharp things. And literally people are collecting these shells, like in Irpin, they're just like bowed, like on the ground, and picking up these shells, and you have to do that by hand, like shell after shell after shell. And it's a this work feels very unproductive because it needs to be done, and people say like, yeah, we want to do it because we want our kids or our grandkids to walk around here one day, or we want to let out our dog, and we cannot let out the dog as long as it is full of shells here. But it's like, it's quite a strange thing when you know that the earth, like the ground you're walking on, is actually unwalkable, particularly for your children. The next thing I want to briefly talk about is occupation. You know that the Russian army is occupying towns and villages and keeping them under occupation. And I can only talk about those that have been liberated already, because that is where we were and what we've seen. And it's actually people telling stories, very different stories. And these are stories of fear and stories of violence, but also very much stories of the uncivilized character of Russian army. So what you see is there's really a narrative about like orcs, like calling them orcs. There are narratives about soldiers putting an electric kettle on a plate, like on fire. So not knowing what is an electric kettle, not knowing how things work. So the stories people tell about the army is very much a story about orcs in terms of being primitive and brutal. So this orc picture is everywhere and is very much very much illustrated with different stories that all fit in the same scheme of being uncivilized. Actually, for me, it was also was not really a surprise, but the extent of trash that the Russian army left behind, it was really was really shocking. Like everywhere you went, the floor, everything, it was just all trashed with, like all covered with trash. In schools where they had like where the staff slept, everything demolished and destroyed and so on. So this really gives an impression of, and what people say is like, who does such things, right? So they have a very strong feeling of our feeling of civilization has been shattered here through this occupation. I want to also say a word about what you can call the Bucha phenomenon, or Irpin and Bucha as a media phenomenon. I am a little concerned about the huge presence of Bucha and Irpin in media, and also the way it is represented. And this is for two reasons. Like, one reason is that I'm afraid that this could set a benchmark. Like, whatever is less violent than Bucha is not really worth to report anymore. I have met in these villages, I've met so many soldiers also, but so many journalists, and all of them are seeking like the brightest story. All of them are seeking like something really shocking, something really dramatic, right? And people are talking to them and have this feeling that they cannot deliver, like they cannot present enough drama. And this is what they're telling us afterwards. And the interaction between media and locals in these villages is very problematic. So I think both for them, both for the people who are in touch with journalists, but also for those people who are actually watching those news. And those people are not only in Ukraine, but also very much in the West, watching those news and get really focused on a couple of places like Bucha, Irpin, and a couple of others that are in the news, forgetting that actually all Ukraine now has different kinds of problems, catastrophes, lacks, right? It is not limited to these two places. But these two places are very close to Kiev. It's easy for journalists to travel there. They can even get back to Kiev the same day and have like dinner in a Kiev restaurant, right? But others in Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia region are not as accessible and not represented as such. I think we have to be really cautious with this the representation of violence, because it's always also connected with voyeurism, with developing a fascination of violence and things like that. What is, I was speaking about this representation of the Russian army, of the Russian soldiers as orcs. There is also a representation of Ukrainian soldiers, which is very much connected to 2014-15, where already like the word cyborg, kyborgi, became very popular, which is actually framing these soldiers who are doing everything, who are unbreakable, who are making the impossible possible, and even one step further, who are making the impossible an everyday thing. Like this is what Azovstal, like the soldiers in Azovstal say, like the impossible is what we're doing every day. And these stories are told as well, like in the villages. It's very important, this connection with the army, that there are people who are really who are heroes. Like this connection with a hero image is very, very present. What is completely unpresent, actually, what was really surprising me, is the wish for the punishment of the perpetrators. Like not as, except of one person who is an activist and has been an activist before, no one mentioned, when we said, like, what do you wish for in the future? Like, what needs to be done now? Not a single person said, like, the punishment of the perpetrators is now really, really important, and documentation is important. But people said, what is important now is that it won't happen again. Like, we just want that, we do not want to be occupied again. We're really afraid of them coming again, especially people living close to the border. And it's important that the war ends. It's important that we win the war, and that these things stop. So, what is the result of all this? What is the result of living in these landscapes of destruction and landscapes of violation of human rights? We can say landscapes of trauma. It actually, if we have like a very simple separation, we can say the consequence for the nervous system goes into two directions. Either it is stuck on, which means like permanent activity, hypervigilism. I cannot sleep, I cannot really eat, I have to help all the time, everyone. I cannot give myself even half an hour off my phone. I really need to be available all the time. I'm very easily triggered, I'm excited. You can see a person, he's the school director of a school where Russian army was based, and they destroyed the school pretty much. And he was talking to us, and you can, when you look at him, actually, you can see, I mean, he's talking to us, and he's talking fast and loud, and it's visible that he is very, like, that he's in rage, actually. But even on the picture, you can see he's actually in a fighting position, right? While he's talking to us and explaining about the destruction of the school, in the school room where we are standing, he's again and again taking fighting positions. So you can see that his body is actually in a fight modus in this moment where he's telling us. Very typical for people being in this like hypervigilance, stuck on, is going into activism. And this is, I mean, and this is something you see in all Ukraine. Like, people really want to help. They really support each other. People who were in completely different professions before, like taxi drivers, are dealing with evacuation 24/7. The support of IDPs at the train station of Uzhgorod is actually run by a cosmetologist. So people became really active, and they all say, like, I feel that I am already tired, but I can't stop. I cannot switch off my phone. People have my number, and I have to do it. And even if I want to go home and prepare dinner for my family, and someone calls me for help, I will go and I will help, right? And this is, we can say, like, this is great. This is heroic that people stick together and help each other so much. But this is also a trauma reaction, because it's like a result of hypervigilance and is keeping you from taking care of yourself and of your closest ones. The third one, feature of this hypervigilance is the permanent alertness. Distrust, like you're perceiving everything around as potential signal of danger and perceiving danger everywhere, which is absolutely like normal, and it's also very healthy in an area where you still have air raids and where you still have a lot of sources of danger. But what's also connected to it is that there is already a lot of conflict. There is, for example, conflict between the regional administration and the local administrations, like the city administrations and village administrations, who say, like, they didn't evacuate us, we wanted to evacuate, no one really helped us. And the regional administration says, they do not collaborate, we wanted to evacuate them, but there was no one we could work with. So you see clashes in the perception, and you see also a lot of clashes that cannot really be lived out as clashes, because everyone understands it's war, we have to work together, we cannot speak bad about each other. And it's even for me really difficult to say these things and criticize these things, because you can't really criticize a country that is under such attack as Ukraine is now. But you can see these conflicts, you can see distrust, you can see that what's very typical also for war societies and post-war societies, alcoholism and violence is rising. All this is also in the group of these hypervigilance symptoms or somatization. The other group of somatic effects is, we can call it stuck on off. And stuck on off means actually being in disconnection, like not being able to connect with others, not being able to connect with the world, not really being motivated to move, being immobilized, and also not being able to decide. And this is very often the case. I had a case of a client. I'm working as a trauma therapist. I'm not only a historian. So I had a client, it's an activist, and I knew her before, who evacuated from Berdyansk while Berdyansk was already under siege. And she was in Zaporizhia, and she said, I cannot decide what to do. I cannot even leave the room anymore right now. And we have to move, we have to do something, we have to go somewhere, we have to build something up. I cannot just stay here, and I cannot move. And this is very, very typical for people, for traumatized people in this stuck on off. You are unable to decide. You're sitting somewhere and can't really do anything. So the environment actually has quite an effect on people, on traumatized people right now in Ukraine. And I just want to bring the example of two shelters. I visited two shelters in close to Mukachevo and Uzhgorod in Zakarpatsky region on the same day. And one shelter in a school was very, very much stuck on off. Like people were, you see it on the left side, like people were sitting there with their packed bags as if they were waiting. They didn't move. They didn't really interact with each other. It was like the whole atmosphere in that house was like stone, like something really not moving. And we talked with the administration of the shelter, the city administration, and the administration was very much on, like, we have to feed these people. they have to survive, they shouldn't die. So they told us they get everything they need to survive, right? Someone asked me to give a concert for them, organize a concert for them, but I said no, because it's not the time for concerts, right? Why, like volunteers who could work with children, like no, what work with the children? The people have to survive. So if the city administration, if these people are very much oriented to, they need to survive, which means they need food, and they need hygiene products, and they need a shower and a washing machine, right? Then that is already very much saving people's lives, but it's feeding people and it's not nurturing people. I was in another shelter that day where the whole situation was completely different. There were like kids playing everywhere, driving on the corridor on their bikes, as you see on the picture. There were volunteers coming in and playing with the kids like 3 times a week. The adults were offered to work in the kitchen or work in the garden whenever they want. And also some families, some women with their children were sent on 10-day rehabilitation programs in Hungary. And you had a pretty lively atmosphere. I talked to IDPs from the East who were there, who said like, no, like the person managing it, she's like a mother to us. She's really doing everything to us. And we even had this like Easter egg, it's not painting, but like something colorful with whatever, bandage, yeah, kind of art classes for children and adults. And so these people are in the same situation, right? They are in a shelter. The shelters are 40 kilometers from each other, but you have a completely different picture. And that tells us that there's quite a lot we can do, right? We can just feed people, but we can also nurture people. And to nurture people, traumatized people, you need more than just giving them food and a shower and a washing machine. The other thing, what is really important, like we're doing a lot of advisory for families now who say, like, what can we do to support our children? Like, what can we do to support the elderly, to support our parents? And there are a couple of ways of support that you can do just in your family, just in your village, that are pretty effective. And one thing is doing things together, right? These are pictures of like clearing the rubble together. But of course, there are more things you can do together. And what we're doing with people, and what we are also like suggesting people to do, is cooking together, singing together. These are things like doing something in movement together, something rhythmic together, is actually very much very successful. What we say in somatic trauma therapy, what helps best is orientation, movement, and contact, like being in touch with another person, being in contact with people, having movement at the same time, and being able to have an orientation where you are, like an inner orientation in your body and an outer orientation is what helps. And later on, Robert will talk about Samopomoc, which is a service that helps a lot. And actually, there is another service very similar to Samopomoc that is called Phoenix, and that we're running. And Phoenix is also doing trainings and Instagram posts and sending this comic around that is like free to download for everyone and free to use for everyone. So that's a possibility to help. What I would like to stress is that there are a lot of areas still under occupation, and we don't really know what's going on there, and they can be liberated any time, and the moment they're liberated, they will need our help. They will need humanitarian aid, they will need evacuation of people, of affected people. They will need trauma therapy, and I chose that picture. That is a picture of me and my very close friend Lila, who's in a village under occupation, and I haven't heard from her. Like, she's trying to write me whenever she can, but it's like very limited. And when I was on the way to the conference in the taxi, I just got a message from her, and she's alive. And like a lot of those people in the occupied areas are waiting to meet their friends and family, activists, people from our program are waiting to meet us again. And I really hope this will be possible. So let me conclude, and let me conclude with a picture or with a system that links a little bit the individual судьба, fate, right? Sorry, the individual fate to the country. When I was driving through Ukraine now, the landscape has changed a lot. It's a landscape of checkpoints and of destroyed bridges, like a lack of connection, which very much responds to the trauma lack of connection in the body, the individual one, right? We have a landscape of separated regions of a fragmented country, and you have fragmented families, and they're not only fragmented on the generational line as it was in 2014-15 when the young people moved to the west and the elders stayed in Luhansk, Donetsk, but you have now fragmented families along a gender line. You have curfew, right? And in some places you have to darken your windows during curfew, which very much responds to the dark hours that people in Ukraine and traumatized people out of Ukraine now experience very frequently. You have roads impassable to impassable roads. So on a trauma level, this would be behaviors, ways to act that are impossible to access for you right now. In cities like Lviv, memorials are hidden, so they will not be affected by shelling if there is shelling in the old center, which very much responds to limited access to memory when you're traumatized. And I was talking about the shells everywhere, right? And the shells everywhere in the gardens and the streets are very much a symbol of the traumas and triggers that are inside you, and you never know what around you will trigger this. When will you step on the next shell? I also want to talk, when I talked about the landscapes of resilience, right? Groups of women in shelters who unite and cook together. Volunteers who are coming and playing with the children. Kids playing outside. Field kitchens run by NGOs feeding the people, and then people standing there in the line and talking to each other. I want to talk about the starosta of the elder of a village, who made sure that still under occupation, she would be seen in the street, and she was wearing a white hat. So she was always wearing this white hat, making sure that people see her because they would gain trust that they will survive. Connection, concerts, and music, and also the media. The president of Ukraine is actually doing a great job. I remember in my organization in Vostok SOS, when he was elected, there was great skepticism, and people were saying like, oh my God, this is not what we need. I mean, this is a comedian, and this is not really a politician. And now we see in this situation, the media competence of Zelensky, the motivational character of what he says, the way he can present Ukraine to the outside, and the way he can uplift people during this war is exactly what is needed right now, and this is very much perceived by very many people in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Okay, so if I can have my presentation. So I will be talking a little bit about what we are doing in the Federation Global Initiative on Psychiatry and the Ukrainian Psychiatric Association. And what I want to start with is this psychological aid program. I go to first. Just a minute. I need to get the hang of this. This psychological aid program that was mentioned before, Samopomish. So we started this together with the National Institute of Mental Health in Prague and with GMP Tbilisi after the repression started after the rigged presidential elections in Belarus. Noticing that there were a lot of people that were affected by the arrest, and we are talking about tens of thousands of people arrested, people beating up in prison, people raped in prison, people afraid to get out onto the streets, people disappearing, and a country closed with mental health professionals in the country seeking support. So gradually, what we started to do is train mental health professionals in Belarus to deal with their clients, with in particular human rights defenders, and eventually try to expand the number of people that could help them, that could support them in this work. And so we developed initially the Samopomoc program, which, let me see, that's the next, yeah, which is a program based on a website, samopomo.ch. So it looks like it's a Swiss website, but actually we did it because then you have the full name. And this is a website which has 3 parts of information. One is how to maintain a healthy lifestyle and maintain your mental health. Second, what can you do yourself? So it's a self-help website. Advice what to do in case of anxiety, depression, panic attacks. And then the third is where can you go when you need professional help? And on this website, if you register as being from Belarus, then you don't get a list of kind of mental health centers where you can go to, but you get a list of consultants which are working within the Samopomoc program and which give online consultation to people who seek help. Free of charge consultation. For the client, free of charge. We pay the consultants because we understood that this was a program which would have to run for a long time, and volunteerism is possible only for a certain period of time. People need to maintain themselves, maintain their families, so they need an income. And so by the end of last year, the website had about 45,000 active users, lots of tests taken, most of the tests focusing on depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, depression, basically all from moderate to severe. And we managed to provide 600 free of charge consultations to 90 human rights defenders, of which a quarter victims of torture. And so the consultants that we work with are based outside Belarus. They are in Georgia, they're in Ukraine, they're in the Czech Republic, they're in Lithuania, Poland, and in Scandinavia. They're all Russian-speaking, certified mental health professionals with a psychotrauma specialization. And so Jana is one of the 2 people that maintain the quality, that make sure that the people working within the system have the necessary level of knowledge. And so by the end of last year, we managed to get 2 million views on Facebook. We work on Telegram with 2 million views on Facebook, and we can see from the statistics where people are coming from, 95% are Belarusians. Others are based in Sierra Leone or some other weird countries, and clearly these are Belarusians that are using VPN and pretend that they're not in Belarus, right? So then when the war started, let me go a little bit further. This one. So when the war started, we decided to set up the same in Ukrainian language. And we made the decision because we noticed that also a lot of the friends and colleagues that we have that are actually Russian speaking suddenly started to communicate with us in Ukrainian or English, not wanting to use Russian. And so we decided we needed to have this alternative. And with the whole team, we managed to basically redo the whole website within 1 month. I mean, this was a major undertaking. So the whole website is now also Ukrainian language. All the translations have been validated. Everything is evidence-based. We also opened the channels on social media, so Telegram, Facebook, Instagram. And by now, the Facebook has had over 16 million views. So we see the enormous response that it has. We post basically every day. every day a short message on Facebook. What do you do in this situation? What do you do in that situation? What do you do when you're in a bomb shelter with kids that panic? You know, very, very practical information. And then people who want more in-depth knowledge, they can go to the website. By now, we have about 30,000 users of the website. And as we notice from what they are looking at, it is mainly mental health professionals who use the resources in their own work. The original team that we had of consultants, if I'm correct, there were 18 of them, right? Jana, 6 of them were Ukrainians. So we immediately moved the 6 Ukrainians to the Ukrainian language program. And they are answering all the requests for help that come in via Messenger. So people via Facebook can ask us for help. And that's like usually every 5 minutes somebody is writing. And we see the change. So the first weeks it was very often people writing, I'm okay, I will manage, I don't need help. And then gradually the request for help started. Woman whose husband just committed suicide. Mother with kids in the bomb shelter who panic, what do I do? And so these 6 consultants, they answer all the messages that are coming in. So it's an ongoing service. And in extreme cases, they organize a phone call or a consultation via Zoom. In the meantime, we are now training the next group of Ukrainian mental health professionals. We're also training the next group of Belarusian mental health professionals because we lost 6 consultants in the original program. So we need to replace them. And so the next step that we are now trying to get off the ground, hopefully beginning of June, is that we will start providing free consultations to first-line responders. Because we realized that, if we open this up to the whole population, we are out of order within 24 hours. It's impossible to answer to everything. So we selected the first-line responders, which are mental health professionals who need supervision or intervision, doctors, staff working in military hospitals, people working in the ambulance services, rescue workers, journalists, people who have had a direct confrontation with the horrors that are happening. And so they will be able to contact us and get their free consultation. And we will again be paying the consultants because they need to feed their families and themselves, right? So this is a program which has become much bigger than we ever expected. And what is interesting is that it also shows us that it is actually possible to do a lot of mental health care support via electronic means. So this, it's like very often, and in mental health we always say this, every crisis is an opportunity, and this was an opportunity to scale up to a level that we thought that we would never be able to reach. Then another program is the provision of medical aid. So Ukraine has 58 psychiatric hospitals, 145 social care homes, psychoneurological internats. Social care home is a kind of euphemistic mentioning of or name because they're not social, there is very little care, and they're definitely not a home setting. It's big institutions where over 90% of the clients will never get out. So it's, it's a remnant of Soviet psychiatry. And again, luckily, with the COVID epidemic, we managed to supply many of them with PPE, with personal protection equipment. So with masks, with thermometers, in order to deal with the COVID pandemic. Because, there is this kind of typical Ukrainian situation that when there is a crisis, the government is very slow to respond and has this feeling that, well, the NGO sector will do it anyway, so why should we, right? And so this was in this case as well. And so we have a lot of contacts across the country with these mental health institutions. So gradually we have now built up a system together with the Ukrainian Psychiatric Association with 2 warehouses in Lviv. A third one will now be opened in Ivano-Frankivsk, where we gather aid coming in from outside. We are in contact with institutions. We seek contact with institutions to find out what they need. And we try to provide this aid as tailor-made as possible to the needs, as equally divided between institutions as possible, with a priority for those in the front line, because they are the ones in the, the most difficult situations. So I have a few photos. This was when Chernihiv was still reachable, before the bridge was blown up. So the road is gone. They are, it's all one mess. This is Chernihiv in the distance. This was the first delivery there. And the lady in the center, in the green kind of vest, I mean, she's a hero. This is Tatyana Dergach. She is the chief psychiatric specialist of the Ukrainian penitentiary system. A refugee from Donetsk, now again a refugee from Kiev, so living in Lviv with her daughter, and she manages this whole program. And so we've made, dozens of deliveries now to institutions throughout the country. There's Mykolaiv, Kozalech. So when Chernihiv was not reachable anymore, we brought it to a small town as close as possible and left it there. And then the director of the hospital, together with his staff, would smuggle the stuff in, box after box, so in order to get it to his hospital. Nikopol, Zaporizhia. So also deliveries to, this is Zhytomyr. This photograph is for me really, I know these 3 ladies. This is the psychiatric hospital in Zhytomyr. We've been doing a lot of work there. And you can see in the faces how stressed and exhausted they are. And so we are raising funds in order to keep this system going. So we are coordinating on the Ukrainian side, and we are trying to coordinate on the outside side. So we are dealing with Western psychiatric associations, with the Netherlands. The hospitals there have joined forces, and so have promised to deliver aid in an ongoing basis for at least a year, if not longer. And so by now, 3 20-ton trucks have arrived in Lviv, and this is material that we have been able to send out. And so this program, we assume, will have to keep on going for a very long time, even if the war is over, because when the war is over, still before you have your system up and running again, it will take a long time. Then a third thing that we're doing. So Lithuania now has over 50,000 Ukrainian refugees, about 10,000 Belarusian refugees, many of them activists. And the big problem is that especially the Belarusians and Ukrainians, they very often do not speak other languages than Russian or Belarusian Ukrainian. And Lithuania is already a country in which the younger generation doesn't speak any Russian. So the connection with mental health care services is becoming a big problem. The older generation speaks Russian, but is too Soviet educated for this type of work. The middle generation has their private practices, so they're very busy, they're in the middle of their careers. And the younger generation doesn't speak the language anymore. So we need to see a way how we can connect these two communities, the refugee community and the mental health community. And so beginning next week, we are going to set up a crisis center at the Vilnius Mental Health Center, which will be staffed by professionals from Belarus and Ukraine under auspices of a Lithuanian doctor, because formally they cannot work on EU territory, but they will be doing the work. But all the recipes and everything else needs to be signed off by a Lithuanian professional. And we will see whether this is a system by which we can provide concrete mental health support to the refugee community here in Lithuania. And if it works, it might be a system that we can also, export. It's a pilot project, right? And then another project, which sounds like maybe fantasy. So I pointed out this Tatiana Dergach, the chief psychiatrist of the penitentiary system. At the end of 2019, we, together with the penitentiary system, developed a reform plan for prison psychiatry in Ukraine, which is still very much Soviet organized. So there is one prison hospital in Valyansk, near Zaporizhia, and that is where there is the psychiatric unit, and the psychiatric unit is a prison. And so there is absolutely no therapeutic environment whatsoever, and the treatment mainly consists of providing them with drugs, right? And so, I mean, this is the way in the whole of the Soviet Union this used to be. And so in Ukraine, this has been not yet developed. So we developed a plan in order to decentralize the services. Every penitentiary institution should have its psychiatrist or psychologist, and we would create 5 regional units, each unit for 5 of the 25 provinces in Ukraine. And then COVID started, and we signed a contract with the Ministry of Justice, and everything was ready. And then COVID started, and the project, was shelved. And about a month ago, the prison hospital in Valyansk was evacuated because the front line was coming to close. And so the prisoners were moved westward. And so Tatiana had to find a place for the 50 mental health patients, for the psychiatric patients, and found this empty building near Lviv, which is exactly what we wanted to have. The size is right, the structure is right. It's one of those situations where a crisis suddenly gives you a huge opportunity. So she has been calling me ever since that I need money in order to reconstruct it. We need 30,000 euro for the reconstruction so that we can actually function. 1/3 is already in. And so I hope before the summer we can actually create one of the units that we would like to have and then start training. And part of the training can be done by Zoom. Part of the training is physical, it's aggression management training. But, the lucky thing is we're working in the prison system and with people from the prison system who are usually kind of used to hazardous environments. So this physical training can easily be done in the Lviv area. And so while the war is going on, we already started with building up a part of the, of the new mental health care of future. And then finally, so FGIP has been working in Ukraine for, as long as it has been independent. We started in the end of 1990. 1991 was the founding of the Ukrainian Psychiatric Association. Ever since, we've been working there. And so the big fight is to try to slowly take away the Soviet system and build up a modern mental health care service. Now we have a situation that a lot of hospitals have been bombed. Some institutions have been completely destroyed. Others have been evacuated. And we understand that after the war, we will have to rebuild mental health care services. And one thing that is absolutely certain, that we don't want the old back, we want the new to come in. And so this is, again, a situation whereby the war might actually give us an enormous impetus to make this move forward. So this is, the program that we are at the moment running. So the concert to which you are invited tonight is one of the events where we will, it's part of this program also what Imke was talking about. We want the refugees here and the volunteers to give them at least a short time of, music heals the soul, right? Give them some relaxation. At the same time, we are trying to raise funds with this, promote the work that we are doing. And I must say that the fundraising campaign is going fairly well. So this system we have up and running, we are able to maintain. And in conclusion, I would like to show you one more clip. This one was made again by Lesia Harchenko, who is in Ukraine. I mean, she is for me also one of those examples of Ukrainians who Putin totally misunderstood. So not leaving the country, her husband is a commander in the Teroborona, in the home army. Her son, she left to Ternopil with her two sons. Her son turned 18 and is now back in Kiev, 18 years old, in the Teroborona, and she is doing her work. And part of this work is making visible what is happening over there. So the moment Chernihiv was evacuated or was liberated, she immediately went in and made a 10-minute clip about life in this psychiatric hospital that was under occupation and where the patients and staff for 4 weeks were living in the cellars. So we can see that clip, please.
«300 хворих, невеличкі 308 було на території лікарні. Уже в перший день війни ввечері всі хворі працівники вимушені були спуститись до підвалу. Практично всю війну не було такого дня, щоб не було обстрілу. З другого дня також були розбиті комунікації, відсутнє світло, теплопостачання, вода. Коли бій почався на перехресті основної траси за нашою лікарнею, в селі Халявін російські війська зайшли. Ну і тут почалося. І прильоти були до лікарні, снаряди.
Це на другий день заїжджають уже танком. Я біжу їм на зустріч, щоб відчинити двері, вони відчиняють і сміються. Не треба, не трудись, ми вже відкрили. Так от після того, щоб зберегти ворота, так я вже не став їх зачиняти. Потім іще приїжджали, іще.
Да, на второй буквально день войны исчезло отопление, потому что были перебиты снарядами коммуникации, сети инженерные.
Зробили таке невелике багаття в перші дні, коли зникло у нас світло і палення, і ми палили тут. Це було таке примітивно створене багаття, де ми варили їжу тричі на добу, дрова збирали самі в лісі або рубали. Те, що знаходили, все було дерево спалене. Ми разом це все робимо, ми робимо разом, персонал, пацієнти допомагають нам.
Вот уже накурюсь хоть.
Ну, мне надо было помогать тут, потому что некоторые уезжали до дому, закончился свет, вода, все. Больница осталась без воды. Пришлось своей машиной возить сюда воду. Страшно было в плену, когда включили газ в подвале. Вот тогда было действительно страшно. А уже когда по минах ехал, уже как бы страх, он, конечно, присутствовал тут. От этого уже нельзя сбежать. Но уже было более... Тем более я знал, что я везу людей, я уже за них отвечаю. Мой страх как бы должен оставаться при мне. Руки уже как бы позаживали, так поопухали, что, наверное, Кличко, отдыхая. Такой кошмар мы пережили, что...
Зараз ми перебуваємо у підвальному приміщенні, яке є більше для комунікацій, для водопостачання, для водовідведення, але, на жаль, ми змушені тут перебувати з першого дня війни, і ми пристосувалися до життя у цих підвалах, де ми знайшли прихисток. І завдяки цим підвалам ми захистили життя наших пацієнтів і працівників. Для того, щоб зберегти тепло, ми позакривали підручними тканинами, ковдрами, вікна, проходи для того, щоб було нам тепліше і затишніше.
Да, дивіться, будь ласка, значить, тут і деякі продукти, хліб ми в мішках у нас стоїть. Тут у нас ліки, розкладка для пацієнтів на вечір, на ранок і в обід. Ми беремо і підходимо до хворих і видаємо ці ліки. Тут наше відділення знаходиться. От. Тут одна палата у нас, де знаходяться пацієнти, сплять як можуть на щитах і на матрасах, вкриті ковдрами. Далі ще одна палата.
Всі були покормлені, брились раз, раз побрилися, то не мились. Чуйне ставлення медицинського персоналу, забота.
Маємо нічний туалет, який ми прибираємо 3 на день. Іншого варіанту немає, комунікації не працюють у нас. Добрий вечір, дівчата. А що так тихенько, як мишенята тут? Фактично, цей медичний персонал, який зараз тут, з першого дня війни і не залишав своє робоче місце до сьогоднішнього дня.
Страшно вам було? Конечно. Стіни двигтять, і стекла двигтять, і б'ються стекла.
Все було важко, коли було чутно, як летить самоліт, як взриваються бомби. Це було дуже важко, тому що ти не знав, чи це зараз на тебе попаде, чи це пройде мимо. І їм треба щось розказати. Чому так?
Дівчата, розкажіть, якщо коли стріляли, як ви співали українські пісні.
В саду гуляла, квітки збирала, в саду гуляла, квітки збирала, кого любила, причарувала, причарувала серце і душу, причарувала серце і душу. Тепер з тобою гуляти мушу, ходити буду, любити буду, ходити буду, любити буду, скажу по правді, сватать не буду, ходити буду.
За час війни в нас померло в закладі 34 пацієнти, з них поховані 15 тут, на даному маленькому кладовищі, яке ми зробили своїми руками. Деякі могили одиночні, деякі по 4 пацієнта. Ми робили таблички і здійснювали поховання для того, щоб потім можна було відзнайти, ідентифікувати людей, і щоб рідні дійсно їх поховали вже в мирний час, що зараз і відбувається. Сам процес поховання був дуже тяжким і складним, тому що мені приходилось одягати білий халат і стояти перед нашими працівниками і пацієнтами під снарядами, під прицілом снайперів, охороняти наших людей для того, щоб їх не обстріляли.
Хороший, дружище, хороший. Друг ти мой, любезний. Коли відділення закривали, уїхали і забули птичку, так ми зламували двері, ціла рятувальна операція пройшла і визволили тут його на новому місці оселили, тепер у нас з'явився ще один друг. Оп, оп. Нічого, скоро зелені в тебе буде багато. Будеш жити.
Вот, находясь в оккупации под обстрелами, мы сохранили больных. Вот, и сотрудники, конечно, психотравму однозначно получили все, и больные, и сотрудники. Так что сейчас будет чем заниматься, восстанавливаться. Мы начали уже потихоньку восстанавливать больницу, убирать, там, где стеклить.
Щасливого пути.
Okay, let me see how far we are in timing. We still have 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. Are there any questions? Yes, Vladimir. Can we, can you, Volodya, с микрофоном.
I have a question about your one slide. It's IDP. Why it's I? International. Internal. Because after the Second World War was DP, Dipukai in Lithuanian, you know. This is my small question.
Any other questions? Yes, Joris.
Could you say something about the overall rehabilitation need in the next months? There are also refugees from Poland and Germany and other countries now returning. People find shattered houses, shattered lives, lost relatives. It's a big question, and it's very difficult to answer, of course. But could you share with us your thought on the need for trauma care and in relation to rebuilding and rehabilitation?
Yeah, the interesting thing is this is a question that I actually wanted to put to Jana. Because you understand, Georgia went through the Russo-Georgian War in 2008. They went through this whole process. In a way, they are ahead. And so, Jana, maybe from your own experience, you can give an answer to this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this question. Actually, that's a long-term work. No magic stick exists to just to change rapidly anything. Actually, the study which I showed. That's a 2012 study, which actually indicates such a high prevalence of mental health problems among internally displaced people who were displaced in early 90s. So not all the problems we will be able to address. And probably the most urgent thing, and to consider this as a rehabilitation, that's to recreate conditions for normal life, like school, community life. So step by step building everything. Yeah, and psychological support is just one dimension, and psychosocial rehabilitation is one dimension. So not to psychologize too much, not to psychiatrize too much. So we need multi-layered, multidisciplinary response, and step by step. And we need to realize that that's not that's marathon, not sprint. Yeah.
Yes.
Is that on? Okay, if I can add to this, what women in the shelter told us is that it's actually really helpful to go out of the country, even if it's only for 10 days or 2 weeks, to this rehabilitative retreats. And this is something that will be very important, not only long term, but also in the coming months, that people in the shelter actually get the opportunity to have a couple of days with their kids in one room, not having to share it with other families, and actually being outside in nature, having support, getting taken care of in terms of food and everything that they need. So these like short-term rehabilitative residencies, they are very important right now.
I think one of the turning points has been 2004, the tsunami, in particular in Aceh and Sri Lanka, where, like in Sri Lanka, we saw traffic jams of all the Western aid organizations in their big white, Land Rovers, clogging the streets. And that then in these fisher villages, a therapist wanted the fishermen to sit in a circle and talk about the trauma. And actually the only thing that they really wanted was a boat to go out and fish and feed their families.
Sure.
Lives need to start again. You need work, you need your roof over your head, you need to be with your family, because this is the best, rehabilitation, actually.
And actually, when that's about natural catastrophe, and of course, people need to have conditions to be back to the normal life. But as we are speaking of man-made catastrophe, here justice issue is very important, and how to actually achieve justice, how to proceed with the torture cases and rapes cases and man-made violence cases. So here, to involve also international justice mechanisms is very important for rehabilitation. And not only international, of course, but probably international frame is very much needed when two countries are in war. Yeah.
Yeah, Monique?
Well, first I would like to express gratitude that maybe everybody felt in this audience to you and all your colleagues that are doing this wonderful work, and about the passion that you relate to it. So thank you for that. And then I wanted to ask to Imke, I didn't actually understood the part of the orcs and the electrical kettle. That was somehow not...
Okay, maybe that was a little bit too short, because I'm so used to it. So when people we met in the past weeks were talking about Russian soldiers, they were actually not saying Russian soldiers, but they're saying the orcs, right? Orcs are, do you know what an orc is? Okay, orcs are from Lord of the Rings, these like huge creatures who are not like cognitively not very well developed, but very big, very strong, and they just do what they are ordered to do, which is actually just destruction. So it's fantasy figures that are primitive, cognitively primitive, and oriented towards killing and destruction. And this is how people call Russians. They also say the fascists, the racists, like very, very rarely you hear the Russian soldiers. You hear either they or the orcs or the racists, the fascists, racists. Right. But they also said racist sometimes, whatever. Like they're saying all kinds of things, but they're not saying the Russian soldiers. And then they're telling stories about their primitivity, right? So they're telling stories how they did not know how to use things that are very normal to us, like a fridge or an electric kettle, that they didn't know how to use a gas oven or things like that. So in every village we heard stories, and it's probably not happening in every village, but it's these like stories that you have at one point, and then they become so popular and everyone repeats them. But it's very popular, these stories about the uncivilized character and the primitivity and inability to live in a civilized world of the Russian soldiers that they have encountered.
Can I add something? Yeah, speaking of rehabilitation, also we need to remember that after man-made violence, this victim-aggressor stereotype of relationships is often projected within the community, within the society. The Georgian society is still very fragmented and very often bipolar, like two political parties are struggling and the whole nation almost is divided into two and hates each other. So this kind of developments also is possible to face. So therefore rehabilitation should also actually be focused at rehabilitating normal mechanisms of community decision making and just trying to help society to reconcile within the society.
Okay, well, I think that we need to end this session now. Thank you very much for listening. You know, there's one thing that I would like to mention at the end is, I mean, this staff of these institutions, I mean, these are real heroes. You know, this is working under the most difficult circumstances, themselves affected by war, and they stay with their patients and try to take care of them. And I think this is an aspect which is very often forgotten. There was a report published a couple of days ago that children had been abandoned in institutions, and, you know, scandal, how is this possible? 99% of the mental health personnel in Ukraine is performing miracles under these circumstances, because in spite of fear, they stay with their patients. And I think this is something that really deserves a lot of respect. Okay, let's have a coffee break. We will start again at 15:50. Thank you. So let's start the last session of today, which is the session commemorating Romas Kalanta, who on coming Sunday 50 years ago died of self-immolation. A young Lithuanian student who set himself on fire not very far away from here, on Laisvės alėja. It was a burning protest against the occupation of his country, and the action resulted in his painful death. As a result, Romas Kalanta, who was only 19 years of age at that time, became a symbol of Lithuanian opposition to the Soviet occupation in his country. Kalanta was not the only one who took this ultimate step to protest against communist rule. There were people before him and people after him. In Czechoslovakia, Hungary, in Latvia, Poland, and in Ukraine. One of those who took the ultimate method of protest, self-immolation, is here today, Ilya Rips, who was 20 at the time and who tried to burn himself in '69 following the example of the Czech student Jan Palach, who died in protest against the invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact troops in 1968. And he became an example of Czechoslovak opposition against the suppression of the Prague Spring. Self-immolation as a protest is not new. Legends of people of committing the act of self-immolation date back centuries. The first instance is said to come from Sati, one of the wives of the Hindu god Shiva, who, according to myths, She married against her father's wishes and then burned herself to death after her father insulted her husband. A very famous case of self-immolation in the 20th century was that of Thich Quang Duc in 1963, during the rule of Ngo Dinh Diem, the autocratic South Vietnamese ruler who advanced the agenda of the country's Catholic minority and discriminated against Buddhist monks. And in response, Quang Duc doused himself in gasoline in the middle of a street in Saigon and lit himself ablaze. And later other monks followed his example and burned themselves out of protest against the repression of Buddhism. More recently, in Northern Africa, Mohammed Bouazi, a street seller, killed himself in exactly the same fashion, and his suicide by fire on December the 17th, 2010, launched the Tunisian revolution, ultimately bringing down President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali and launching the Arab Spring across the region. It also inspired self-immolations across North Africa, others who attempted this form of suicide as statements of their own desperation and frustration with the authoritarian regimes in their countries, and at least 8 people died in Tunisia, Egypt, and Mauritania. More recently, only 18 months ago, on October the 2nd, 2020, the Russian journalist Irina Slavina, founder and chief editor of the independent news website Koza Press, died after setting herself on ablaze outside the regional branch of the Interior Ministry building in Nizhny Novgorod, east of Moscow. And she wrote the same day on her Facebook, "For my death, please blame the Russian Federation. It was the day before that law enforcement had raided her apartment, arriving with electric saws to cut the door open and search her apartment. And they confiscated her laptop, cell phone, USB sticks, and all the written notes from a press conference. And so she was left without the means of production for her own journalistic work." The death of Kalanta here in Kaunas almost 50 years ago resulted in massive demonstrations, which were so threatening that the Soviet authorities sealed off the city. And in order to explain the behavior of Kalanta, a team of psychiatrists was ordered to create a post-mortem psychiatric diagnosis. And of course, the committee came to the conclusion that Kalanta had been suffering from schizophrenia, a diagnosis used by the Moscow School of Psychiatry in order to be used as a pretext to send dissidents and believers to psychiatric hospitals where they were tortured with neuroleptics and other so-called sophisticated methods. Their favorite version of schizophrenia was that of the sluggish type, вялотекущая schizophrenia. And symptoms of the sluggish schizophrenia were struggle for the truth, perseverance, reform ideas, or religious delusions. And of course, Kalanta's act fitted this bill perfectly. Also, Ilya Rips was diagnosed to be suffering from schizophrenia, but was lucky enough to be held in a psychiatric hospital in Riga for 2 years only and discharged, after which he managed to emigrate to Israel. Denius Pouras will be speaking much more about the psychiatric aspect of the Kalanta case, but I will restrict myself here only to one remark. In 2009, when I was working on my book Cold War in Psychiatry, I interviewed the then director of the big Noyoye Vilna psychiatric hospital outside Vilnius, Valentinas Mačiulis. And Mačiulis, a typical example of a Soviet hospital director who managed to cling on to power for almost 30 years after Lithuania became independent again, was very clear to me about Kalanta. He believed that the boy had indeed been mentally ill and confided in me secretively that actually there were documents missing from the Kalanta file, and these were exactly the documents that proved that Kalanta had been mentally ill. I would now like to give the floor to Denius Pouras to continue the story about Lithuanian psychiatry and Romas Kalanta.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to contribute to this very meaningful conference. It is May now, and we once again commemorate Lithuania's Day of Civil Disobedience tomorrow. 50 years have already passed since the death of Romas Kalanta, and this is sufficient period of time to allow historians, political scientists, sociologists to reflect on the meaning and significance of that historic event. I am neither a historian nor a political scientist or sociologist, but it so happened that as a psychiatrist, I had to seriously delve into the nuances of Roma's life and death, and at the same time reflect on the state of Lithuanian society then and now. I will seek to share my insights about how I value Roma's sacrifice, the events that transpired in Kaunas in '72, and the impact on the development of Lithuanian society and the state itself. When Romas died, I was a teenager. I remember that I was interested and curious about what was behind all this story, and also about what could have been different at that time in Kaunas, because in my native city of Vilnius, capital, nothing like the unrest that occurred in Kaunas in May '72 would have been possible, I think so. I learned much more about Romas in 1989. Then, a young psychiatrist, I was invited to join a commission of experts conducting a review of Roma's post-mortem psychiatric evaluation. That summer, we, the Commission's members, spent many days reviewing surviving documents and meeting with people who had known Romas. The Commission members felt a strong sense of responsibility. After all, even then, one could hear the opinion that one government, the Soviet government, had supposedly instructed psychiatrists in '72 to diagnose Romas with a psychiatric disorder, and now another government would tell another group of psychiatrists to declare him mentally perfect or something like that. This is why my colleagues and I agreed in '89 that were we to find signs of one or another mental illness after reconstructing the final months of Roma's life, we would inform the public accordingly. Our commission did not determine that Romas Kalanta had been mentally perfect or healthy. Rather, we concluded that we were unable to find any indication that he had suffered from a mental illness. The '72 Commission, however, unequivocally established that Romas had suffered from a severe mental illness, schizophrenia, and what was the principal evidence supporting the assertion that Romas was severely mentally ill and that he was incapable of understanding the consequences of his action when he committed suicide? The three issues. First, according to '72 Commission's findings, the first piece of evidence was that he chose to kill strange, unusual type of suicide, not by hanging as Lithuanians used to do, but in the city center, putting himself on fire. So this was sort of psychotic, act. More interestingly, the Commission was guided by the fact that this was extremely important and likely decisive argument, that they found a sentence in an essay from Romas once written for school, expressing his belief that Lithuania will one day be free. So this was obvious delusion, and it was evidence of psychotic, state. The psychiatrist also claimed as proof the fact that he, as is often the case with severely mentally ill patients, was incapable of caring for himself because he was wearing long hair. So this meant that he had insufficient will to perform even the simplest of tasks, such as cutting his hair. So it means very, very severe form of schizophrenia. Our commission worked for a considerable time. Now I speak about our commission, '89, and not only reviewed surviving information, but also met with his friends, loved ones. I can sincerely say that Romas became among my best known acquaintances, even if, of course, I never actually met him when he was alive. A psychological portrait of Romas began to emerge through conversations with his friends, family members. That portrait encompassed various personal traits, but after creating a sufficiently accurate reconstructions of at least last 1 year of his life, it had no room for any psychopathology. Not only did we find nothing that would indicate the presence of severe mental illness such as schizophrenia, we were also unable to discern any clear signs of depression. Our commission refused to challenge the prior commission's verdict, although such a question was assigned to us by the prosecutor's office of the day. Our duty was to say that we had or had not found, and not to judge whether the 72 commission had been wrong or right. Whether we like it or not, psychiatry is a field of science and practice that is closely associated with value judgments. This is why Roma's final act in life and his prior behaviors that were an expression of Protestant nonconformity, wearing long hair, openly expressing a vision that Lithuania now is not free, but it will be free, were identified by the psychiatrists of their time as unequivocal psychopathology and signs of severe mental illness. An absolute minority of people behaved as Kalanta had, and most people would say that what is normal is how the majority behaves. This is how sadly common sense often works, and psychiatry is also part of this, I should say, wrong common sense. I do not agree, of course, with the findings of prior commission, but all I know, since some of my teachers, my professors were members of that commission of 72, and we have openly discussed the matter on more than one occasion, is that the commission members in both 72 and 89 came to their own but very different conclusions themselves and not under pressure from authorities. So there may be slight difference what Robert was saying. In my opinion, both the act of Roma's self-immolation and the conclusions of 72 and 89 commissions are now part of Lithuanian history and European history. Every citizen, every expert is free to judge those events according to their own value system. For example, there were still many psychiatrists after 1990, the year Lithuania regained independence, and I don't doubt there are many still today who are more inclined to agree with the findings of 72 Commission, that he was mentally ill. I believe that reflects the values of Lithuanian psychiatry as a whole and Lithuanian society of recent decades in general. This is why I feel that instead of somehow nullifying the findings of the 72 Commission, something with some groups in society continue to insist, their opinion should remain known to future generations as some kind of monument, I should say. The conclusions of that era's experts reflect a particular side of the value system, a side which, truth be told, remains quite prevalent in Lithuania. Although I am a psychiatrist, the psychiatric aspects of the story interest me not so much as other aspects. Only immature societies, I think, tend to establish such commission to examine where such an action was undertaken by a healthy person or mentally ill person, and then to categorize. If there is no diagnosis, then we consider that person is a hero. But if there is one, that person is a just madman. For some reason, the French haven't come up with the idea to perform a post-mortem psychiatric evaluation of Joan of Arc and then use it to assess her merits for France. I am more interested in the value aspects of Kalanta's sacrifice and society's reaction to the significance of his death then, later, and now. I remember well the prevailing reaction of the generation of my parents and teachers in 72, because Russification and repressions, and we can see this in one of rooms in this exposition, intensified after Roma's self-immolation. There was considerable annoyance, at least in Vilnius, that none of what happened would change anything, and that Lithuania would only suffer from the outburst of one failed young man. So many saw Roma sacrifice as meaningless and even harmful, and in that respect something more akin to the inability of an ill person or a loser to adapt to their surroundings. But in '89 and in later years, with the change in Lithuania's situation and Roma sacrifice began to be assessed from historical perspective, one could see that it had been a very important event that essentially linked the post-war anti-Soviet resistance, so around 17 years after Romas, and then after 17 years, Sąjūdis, national movement. So it is no secret that Kalanta set himself on fire just before the first visit by an American president to Moscow. It was Richard Nixon, viewed by many at the time as a thriving empire. I mean Soviet Union, which had dealt with all of its problems. Kalanta's self-immolation forced the world so strongly doubt that view that for Lithuania it revived the fragile hope that its case for freedom was not hopeless. Even if believing that or saying so aloud at the time was considered pure insanity by a large part of society, as we now see. Today, although we have been an independent country for more than 30 years, I often think, especially during Kalantinias, the anniversary of Kalanta's protests, that we have still only taken first steps in realizing Kalanta's dreams, and that along the way to true liberation, we still find ourselves trapped in the treacherously constructed traps laid by the totalitarian system, which Romas protested, and including totalitarian or repressive psychiatry. In this respect, Roma's crusade is going on. Having secured our country's freedom and independence, we are not yet liberated on the inside, within each of us as individuals and as a society. Although we have enormous opportunity beyond setting ourselves on fire, like Romas did, and other ways to liberate our country from the conventions foisted upon us by the totalitarian system, to this day, we still often consider cooperation with a failed, often corrupted system and conforming to it as the norm, and the view attempts to change it as suicidal behavior. If you are, let's say, too radical to change the system, you will be said that you are sort of suicidal. Let's once again try to revisit 72. Most people in Lithuania had resigned themselves, adapted to the rules foisted upon them by occupying regime and system, and then came Romas, protesting by self-immolation and leaving behind a message from one of his notes. Quote, only the system is to blame for my death. Santvarka in Lithuanian. I don't know how to translate system of establishment, maybe. What did he mean by accusing the system? Or what kind of Lithuania did Romas dream of? It's often said that Kalanta was a herald of national liberation and freedom of religion, which is true. I believe that view is too narrow and that his dream encompassed a broader vision of Lithuania and human rights. I should say universal human rights. As someone who sympathized with the hippie movement, Romas probably protested most against systems that oppressed the individual, severely restricted civil rights, and fostered a society of humble conformists. I thought about this many times when, after the restoration of independence, I encountered traditions that hindered the building of flourishing Lithuania as a society of free and responsible citizens. But I will skip this part, and tomorrow is the exhibition. Another exhibition will be opened in Central Post Office, and there will be catalog. And in this catalog, you can find many good texts, and one of them is my longer piece. Just to conclude, that because we remain sometimes dependent on nostalgia for system. It's something like Stockholm syndrome, yes, that we hate the system, but sometimes don't touch, but it's better to stay, stability is most important and so on. And in psychiatry, we still have the same, these long-term care institutions like in Ukraine. So because we remain dependent on this nostalgia for a system that abused us, Lithuania continues to be, not only Lithuania, or the whole region, a country of untapped opportunities. If all we do is emphasize our recovered national independence and religious freedom only, we will not heal or will not flourish as a society. So all human rights and freedoms are equally important, and we must all foster them together, particularly the rights of groups in vulnerable situations. And I think that Romas Kalanta sacrifice is meaningful. He tragically reminded Lithuania, when the Lithuania that considered itself normal, healthy, actually was broken and demoralized. So Romas reminded that the struggle had not been lost. What appeared to many at that time as the act of immature attention seeker or a madman laid a decisive thread connecting the partisan resistance to Sąjūdis and the Lithuanian national rebirth. It later became clear that it was not the conformist majority and its loss of hope of ever living in freedom which had been correct, but rather Romas, diagnosed after his death as mentally ill because he had dared in 1972 to make the assertion, dismissed as delusional at that time, that Lithuania one day will be free. So the march for freedom to freedom continues. Today as never before, it is important that all people living in Lithuania no longer have to suffocate because their rights are being oppressed or their dignity degraded. We need to address movements which look longingly to the past and attempt to use the values of the free world as dangerous and all these strange movements. Today, no one has to sacrifice their life as Romas did to fight for every individual's right to live in dignity and freedom. We only need to agree on the value compass without inventing some new Lithuanian wheel, and focus on the most important of those values, which is respect for the dignity of every person in our country and everywhere. So thank you for your attention.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Denis. So I would like to give the floor to Letizia Santia. She is an Erasmus exchange student from Italy and has been carrying out a very interesting research that she will be talking about. Letizia.
Okay. Thank you, Robert, for your introduction, and I would like to thank the Sakharov Center as a whole for the organization of this event, and especially for having me as an intern in the last 3 months. It's been a really intense experience. I had the opportunity to carry out this research about Romas Kalanta and memory among the young generation. And I'm really honored to be here today sharing all this with you. I wondered for a long time how would it be better to introduce this project, but I would just like to recall how I started. Discussing with Robert, sipping a coffee and talking about history and important events and what young people know, what young people do, and all these difficult topics. And I remember that we had very different views on some matters, so we just said, let's find out, let's go and ask the people. So we chose this meaningful figure for Lithuanian history, Romas Kalanta, and I myself had to study a little bit because I knew very little. And well, I found out that he was a Lithuanian. He was raised in a humble family of workers. He always had a strong personality, strong beliefs. He was particularly sensitive to the social political situation of Lithuania. and particularly concerned about the lack of freedom, especially freedom of expression. And it is often remembered in sources that he failed history exams in school because he was not sticking to the Marxist-Leninist methods and philosophy. Moreover, he was a Catholic, raised as Catholic. He was following somehow the hippie movement, so all these contributed to make Kalanta a rather undesired character for the Soviets. And in the name of his ideas and his beliefs, tomorrow, 50 years ago, he burned himself in front of the Muzikinis Theatre, not far from here. The participation to his funeral was expected to be quite consistent, so the authorities decided to anticipate the ceremony of a couple of hours without further notice. And this caused a great discontent among the crowd that had gathered to pay respect to their fellow. So it actually triggered a riot and a demonstration against the Soviet rule that lasted for a few days. And so we see that the action of one individual actually became the awakening of consciousness of the society, of the young member of society, and flowed in one of the biggest unrest of that period. So once I got acquainted with this character, I drafted a survey. We spread this survey among young people, mainly from high school and young university students and workers. So they were all aged between 16 and 30. Here in Kaunas and also in Vilnius, Klaipėda, other cities, we got a total of 233 answers. More or less, it's 1/3 from workers and university students, 2/3 from high school students. The survey was divided, as you can see in the slide, in 3 sections. The first one was more to know more about, the respondents have a general profile. The second one concerned actual memory, so had the objective to answer to 2 main questions. Do young people remember Romas Kalanta, and how do they perceive this past? And finally, there was a 3rd section dedicated to political activism among youth, to understand if eventually the historical memory is somehow connected to their present. And you will see in the slide the results of this inquiry. I will not say too many numbers, don't worry. So the first question, we can say it got a positive answer. So reassuringly, the majority of the respondents actually know the figure of Romas Kalanta. But this knowledge is sometimes somehow superficial because a part of the people admitted that they would not be able, they know the name, but they would not be able to outline the history in detail. So there are many ways in which the young generation can get in contact with these historical figures. The most common is certainly the education system. Almost all respondents declare that they remembered Kalanta from the high school studies or from other readings. But surprisingly, the places that more obviously are expected to pass on culture and history, such as museums or monuments, were the least common answers. And what is more is that less than half of the respondents had the chance to discuss this topic in family or with friends. So I had the impression that everyone is, open to get this sort of memory somehow, but there is no active research, there is no real engagement with this topic. And in fact, there is another data that somehow confirmed this trend. So when the respondents were asked to rate the influence that Kalanta had on their lives, the reactions are always rather restrained. So we talked about emotional investment, about inspiration of civic responsibilities, interest in politics. None of this reaction is particularly outstanding. It's all quite, the average is really average. And it's not no, of course, but it's not exceptional. So we can say that young people are not completely indifferent to this event. As you can see in this word cloud. When the interviewee had to rate the most suitable adjective to describe Kalanta, the most common words chosen are actually positive, so heroic, inspiring, revolutionary, and very few respondents regarded Kalanta's self-immolation as not useful. And I would like to focus on this word in particular. Like, we all agree that this suicide was not useless. But for who was this useful? Like, surely for his fellow citizens, for the oppressed that found in him the inspiration to fight for the society, and especially the young member of this society that their national consciousness awaked and started to resist the subjugation of communist rule. But can we say that his action is still useful now in contemporary society? The last part of the survey was focused on social and political activism. So in very general terms, the respondents were asked to place themselves as politically active citizens, aware citizens, or to mark if they simply were not interested in politics. Almost half of the interviewees selected the option, I am well informed, but I don't take part in in any demonstration. Now, we should remember that many of the respondents were still in high school, so they are maybe a bit young. Even if we consider only over 18 respondents, the percentage doesn't change that much. So I'm asking myself, can Kalanta's actions still be useful in contemporary society? I believe that yes, they can. Kalanta has a role to play, not only as a national hero of the past, but as an example and an inspiration for the present. So, wrapping up what I said until now, we wanted to know whether young people know Kalanta. Yes, they do. We wanted to know how these past events touch them, and we found out that it's mostly something that is studied at school, but it's seldom reprocessed outside the educational environment. So even if this sacrifice is indeed recognized as heroic and inspiring, it lacks of a transposition in real and active life. So to understand this discrepancy, we should remind ourselves that historical memory is not just a passive knowledge, is not just being aware of past events. We can say that historical memory is effective when it leads to some kind of action, when it triggers a reaction. Now, of course, this is not an invitation to repeat the same kind of process. It is rather an urging to reflect on our present, especially in light of these events, and to remember that what was gained after that struggle should be kept and defended, but should not be taken for granted, because I think that young people like me who were born in a democracy somehow take for granted that it's like this and it's fine, we can live happily. So in conclusion to this research, I can say that apparently the collective memory related to Romas Kalanta is not really effective, but at the same time is not completely inexistent. So there are good premises that can be transformed into action, and since collective memory is socially constructed, the society in the first place, I think, should improve the process of conveying historical facts. So the role of school should be more that of developing critical thinking. It should be easier to discuss. The structure of museums and exhibitions could be more captivating, more engaging. And I believe that in this year, in particularly for the 50th anniversary, in conjunction to the events of Kaunas European Capital of Culture, the exhibition at the post office that was mentioned before, all these will be determining in healing this wound of the collective memory. But at the same time, we cannot blame only society for not doing a perfect job. I would like to invite and urge the young people to become a real fertile soil. And I would like to invite all my peers, although they're not very numerous now in this hall, to be more critical, to be more reactive towards all the stimuli that the society provide us with, and not to become just passive bystanders of the history that we're living, but to be more aware, to be more engaged, and to make sure that the values that Kalanta and his fellows fight for are defended. So to act, really act, so that no one can say that Kalanta's death happened in vain. Thank you for your attention.
Very good. Thank you very much, Letizia. I would now like to give the floor to Eliyahu Rips, originally from Latvia and now professor of mathematics in Jerusalem. The floor is yours.
First, thank you very much for the honor of participating in this remarkable conference. I would say one small remark. The logo of this conference says dealing with a painful historical past. Rather, it should say dealing with a painful historical past and present. Now, more than 50 years ago, while in prison, I tried to imagine how will the world look after 50 years. It turned out that my idea of about it was too rosy. It seemed to me then that protests like that of mine will be in the future perceived as helping to some degree to save the honor of the Soviet Union. Maybe similar thoughts are visiting people in Russia now that fearlessly protest Russian aggression against Ukraine. Despite the hopes that emerged after the crash of the Soviet system, it turned out that the dragon's teeth have grown again. The dream of the great empire possesses people's souls once again. However, the rest of the world, and for us especially the Western world, is far from being idyllic. The tyranny of political correctness is a tyranny, and the war against the freedom of speech is a war against freedom. When we return to the writings of the great Bukovsky, we see that he had foreseen all this. While he was victorious in his personal struggle and was deported from Russia, they exchanged a hooligan for one Louis Corvalan. Обменяли хулигана на Луиса Корвалана, says a famous epigram by Vadim Delaunay. Then, okay, we know the continuation. However, when he came to the West, he realized that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, as says Hamlet's drama. The soft pressure that Bukovsky observed in the European Union is still a pressure. Metaphorically, even when the water is warmed slowly, in the end, crawfish becomes red. This is a metaphor for his book. I beg you, reread his last book, The Judgment in Moscow, both of its parts. It is a remarkable book. It is now finally available in English after a long time. And see how prophetically correct he was in his bitter despair about the future of Russia. Living in Israel is another topic. I observing the prolonged efforts of Iran to gain the deadly nuclear weapons that is first-handedly directed against Israel, though in the end other countries are potentially threatened as well. For example, the big Satan. And I see the sluggish, apathetic, and inconsistent reaction of the international community. Another thing, and who does not feel threatened now in the Eastern Europe? Since I became a religious Jew, as we see now, I know that the reign of evil will eventually come to an end. So far, we are stepping down into an abyss. And let us hope that at least part of us will live to see raising back from the abyss. And let me end with a word from the book of Prophet Samuel. The Lord brings low and rises up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eliyahu. I would now like to give the floor to Petr Blazek from the Czech Republic. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Warren, thank you very much for inviting me at this interesting conference. It is a great honor for me to speak after Mr. Eliyahu Rips and around the memorial meeting for Urma Skalanta. My topic is leaving torches in Soviet bloc, political motivated cases of self-immolation in 1966 to 1989. In 2019, I published a monography, the result of a historical research work that took 15 years, in which I addressed the phenomenon of politically motivated cases of self-immolation in the Soviet bloc. The objective was to present the lives of those who took this radical form of protest against the political oppression of the communist regime in 1966 to 1989. A significant inspiration for me was the work in an English sociologist, Michael Biggs, who published a study which closely analyzed self-immolation as a radical form of political protest in the world. His study was the first global view of the issue. It was published in 2005 in the Oxford book about suicide missions. It is a very inspiring study, but I did not take into account the gradually open archives of the former communist security forces. It was typical for communist regimes that they tried to console or at least misinterpret cases of self-immolation. Relevant KGB documents stored in the Russia archives are real inexecutive. Big's conclusions are therefore relatively very inaccurate in the case of the former Soviet bloc. Biggs decided to start his research on 11 June 1963 when Thich Nhat Hanh immolated himself, becoming the first of many Buddhist monks who chose this shocking act to show their disapproval of the political regime in South Vietnam. 2 months later, other people followed suit in Saigon, including a 20-year-old female monk. The Buddhist reasoning behind such act was to try to move the hearts of their enemies and make them respect religious tolerance. They consistently portrayed their act as an altruistic sacrifice. According to French research, Martin Monestier, such protest can be perceived and rational and logical, since their objective is to investigate a wave of public outrage, to turn the public against the person's adversary, and to force the latter to adopt the requisite measures. However, self-immolation as a form of political protest can also to be subject of public scorn, usually in relation to religious of culture and religious or cultural approaches to suicide. Imitating such a form of protest is quite frequent, although it's mostly triggered by psychological or personal issues. This public dimension of this incident of media here are essential, which is why self-immolation often took place of busy town squares or symbolic places. Two burning monks on the street of Saigon appeared in photographs on video taken by Western journalists who had been invited in advance. The media made this Buddhist an inspiration for their followers for other cultures. In the 10 years leading up to 1963, there had only been 5 self-immolations in Europe, while in the following 10 years, this number rose to 117. Then self-immolation of Buddhist monks strangely resonated with the American public, and in 1960 and 1970, several people immolated themselves in protest against the US military involvement in the Vietnam War. Michael Biggs analyzed 533 successfully proven cases of self-immolation from the period between 1963 to 2000. The estimated number of all cases ranges from 800 to 3,000, including violent attempts, and his date suggests that the most prevalent region for immolation was Asia, with a strong Hindu and Buddhist tradition emphasizing the role of the victim, and at the same time, serious religious, ethnic, and caste conflicts. The highest numbers of self-immolation as political protest per capita had been recorded amongst the Kurds living outside Turkey. Last 2 self-immolation waves occurred in North African countries, especially in Tunisia, and among the Tibetans protesting against the Chinese occupation of Tibet. According to Free Tibet date, there were 105 monks, nuns, and ordinary people since February 2009 to March 2022. It's horrible. 105 people in Tibet. More than More than 50 such cases were indeterminate during the relevant period in the Soviet bloc. However, it is very difficult for a considerable number of them to determine whether they were cases with purely political motivation or just imitation in which self-immolation was used merely as an external form. Based on historical sources, I choose 21 cases in which a last partial political motivation is apparent. It is booked for these cases. Many of the cases of the living torches were a radical response to the August 1968 occupation of Czechoslovakia by the army of 5 Warsaw Pact member states and the suppression of the Prague Spring. But before that, initially, the case of Vietnamese Buddhists played a key role in the choice of self-immolation as a form of protest in Soviet bloc. Before Jan Palach, 4 cases are known so far, 3 of which were Ukrainian and 1 was from Poland. This first was the case of Mikola Dědek, who set himself on fire on April 7, 1966 in Moscow in front of the Lublanka KGB main building. It is Lublanka Square. The Soviet State Department said it had set itself on fire against US involvement in the Vietnam War. This was a complete lie. The 27-year-old ambulance driver protested after had go into a conflict with his employer and government authorities. After January 1969, the self-immolations of Jan Palach had an initiatory significance and evoked a large wave of followers not only in the Czechoslovak environment but also abroad. His act also greet innocence of the cases of living torches which continued to appear in the Soviet bloc until the end of the 1980s. Jan Palach, student of the faculty. Jan Palach, student of the Faculty of Arts, Charles University in Prague, who set himself in fire in Václav Square on 16 January 1969. By this shocking act, he wanted to arouse the Czechoslovak public from lethargy following the August invasion of Czechoslovakia. Palach's protest caused extraordinary reaction, but in the Czechoslovakia and abroad. It is a letter from Brezhnev and Kosygin criticizing the reaction of Czechoslovak public associated to the self-immolation of Jan Palach. It is very interesting document from Moscow archives. To this day, Jan Palach's name is known worldwide. In the upcoming months, several people followed Palach's example. Some were Czech, Jan Zajíc, Evžen Plocek, etc., Slovak, Michal Levčík, and some came from other countries, Sándor Bauer, a young Hungarian man, and Eliahu Rybs. Each research case of self-immolation is unique. Also, the condition in the Soviet bloc states were sometimes fundamentally different, often even in the same historical period, still based on the research which took many years. Two basis types of such protests can be distinguished primarily as record their motivation and objectives. The first type is represented by the self-immolation of Jan Palach. This is protest prepared in advance, which aimed at mobilizing a society that was in an escalated and crushing situation. Similar cases were those of this predecessor, Richard Chivěc and Vasil Makuch, and several followers such as Sándor Bauer, Jan Zajíc, Elia Huribs, Oleg Hirnik, etc. They all left behind death notes, lineage of manifestos in which they tried to awaken society to resistance. According to reaction, Roma Scalanta also belongs to this type. This is also evidenced by the fact that many of his followers have appeared. The second type of self-immolation, in contrast, renegade despair, which most resulted from long-term frustration stemming from the Pandero situation in society in combination with specim's personal problems. This is where the case of Josef Hlavatý, Evžen Plocek, Bohumil Peroutka, Oskar Brizevic, Musa Mahmud, Valenty Badilak, or Vytautas Bičaulis. There is a common general feature in the political motivated cases of self-immolation in the Soviet bloc in that they were a radical display of disapproval of the totalitarian form of rule. It was often a drastic response from members of the occupied nations, most of whom were Czechs, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and Poles, who in extreme situations rejected the enforced communist regime and Soviet military presence. Some of them decided to altruistically sacrifice their life for others, to alert them to indifference and resignation. Even several decades later, their shocking act not only provoked but also lead us to renege on fundamental question of human life. In conclusion, I need to thank to Mr. Apes for his courage to face exile and supporting by Czechoslovakia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Danius, maybe you can join us again. So first of all, let's open the floor to questions. Are there any questions to the speakers? Yes, but we need a microphone. No. Can you bring a microphone, please?
Good evening, everybody. I have a remark in regard to the last presentation of Mr. Peter. I strongly disagree with the scheme. These people are put on the same shelf because the Buddhist monks in Vietnam, they do not fit the shelf. The Tibetan Buddhists, the Czech, Lithuanian, Ukraine, Polish, anti-Soviet, anti-totalitarian protesters stay on the shelf. They have nothing to do with the Vietnamese Buddhists who played the hand of the North Vietnam Communists, Soviets, and Communist Chinese. Well, that might have been a problem of South Vietnamese Catholics, of course, but look, after 10 years from the first case, there were almost none of the Catholics left in South Vietnam after they were overrun by North Vietnamese communists. So it's really a shame for me to see them on the same shelf. It's really shockingly and annoying. I'm sorry for it, but this is how I feel with my hero, Romas Kalanta.
Peter, you want to respond?
It is your opinion. I am a historian. I wrote about Jan Palach and his choice of form of protest. He chose this protest from Vietnam. It is true. It is your opinion, but historical truth is another.
Okay. Any other question? Yes.
Oh, my question to you, doctor. Can you explain me in reality, and so for some of this auditorium, I don't know in English translation, вялотекущая шизофрения, она все-таки есть или ее никогда не было? She is existing or not? Шизофрения, вялотекущая.
Вялотекущая шизофрения. Существует или не существует?
Does sluggish schizophrenia exist or does it not?
To try to make it short, nobody knows actually what is schizophrenia in general. Some concept and no findings, no markers. So this is already shows that psychiatry is more philosophy than medicine. But sluggish schizophrenia was absolutely wrong concept invented by Moscow school. And I have to say that it was not only about dissidents. Each behavior, if you are reading some, if you are interested in some, I don't know, Tibet medicine or something, this is sluggish schizophrenia. If you are at least slightly away from absolute normality, this is sluggish schizophrenia. If you are too honest, this is sluggish schizophrenia. If you don't lie, if you tell the truth every time. Now they call it autism, actually. So we have another problem. But I mean, not in Russia. Now it's a global problem. If you are so like a lot of Nobel Prize laureates who could be diagnosed very easily now, not as sluggish schizophrenia, but as having autistic spectrum. I don't know why we pathologize diversity. I mean, so this is a huge topic. But sluggish schizophrenia was, I think, a very cynical invention, by Peppers, I think so. Yes.
Yeah, in 1988, 10 million citizens in the Soviet Union were on the psychiatric register. So 10 million out of a population of 270 million. Large numbers. So Denis, I have a question to you also. Do I understand you correctly that you would be against annulling the diagnosis that they put on Kalanta in 72?
Probably yes, because what does it mean to annul? I don't know who can do this, because we have many cases in psychiatry where there are no second opinion, especially in forensic psychiatry. Nothing to do with the heroes, but like famous case in Norway, the killing. So there are two conclusions by two commissions. That person is mentally ill and that person is not mentally ill. And then it's up to the court to decide. How can they decide which commission is right or wrong? It's up to God, or I don't know. It's who decides. To confess, in '89 we had a very long debate about this, and because I was youngest, probably I insisted that if we tell A, we should tell B. That we, especially because it was a question raised. I told, let's say that this commission conclusion was wrong. And the other colleagues told, who are we to decide about other psychiatrists? So I don't know. It's more procedural.
But the diagnosis of 72 was clearly made under political pressure. So it's a political decision. It's not a.
So maybe I am convinced by one of my teachers who was in that the commission, Professor Andriškevičienė, and now she died maybe 10 years ago. She spent a lot of time to convince me as a young psychiatrist, then how cannot I see the schizophrenia in this case? So this is why I think, and my question is, what is worse? When psychiatrists are asked by KGB, or when psychiatrists do not need even KGB to tell that only schizophrenic can tell that Lithuania will be free. So I don't know which option is worse for psychiatry, let's say. So this is it. And then there were many cases which I saw, like of punks, how you call it, punk rockers.
Yep.
There were punks already then. They are heroes, I think. They were then, and they were their parents were taking them to famous professors, and I was witness when schizophrenia was diagnosed immediately. I don't think that KGB asked. So this is the problem, that it could happen even without KGB. And as you know, many psychiatrists later were on that side without KGB. So this is a more complicated issue.
Yeah, there was one famous or well-known Ukrainian psychiatrist, you probably remember him, Volodymyr Plotavets, who from Dnipropetrovsk, who became pro-rector of the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. And we had this book, the Biographical Dictionary of Political Abuse of Psychiatry in the USSR. And he is in that book. And he was all the time showing to foreigners that, look, I'm in the book. And I would tell him, listen, Volodya, don't do that. They don't understand. No, he says it's very important because people need to understand that I really believe that they were mentally ill. So he diagnosed a couple of members from the Hare Krishna movement in Armenia and declared them to be schizophrenic. Right? And so later he understood that this concept was wrong. So one other question to you. After Lithuania regained independence, you was one of the founders of the Lithuanian Psychiatric Association. How far did they go in acknowledging the political abuse of psychiatry and who was involved? Can you tell a little bit more about this?
Yes, I was one of founders and first president from 1990 to 92. I resigned in 92 because of pressure of members of, there was other members of association collected signatures and asked me to sign as a president and to send this statement to government to ban all critics of psychiatry, because psychiatry is under attack and it's dangerous. And then instead of signing, I resigned. So this means that we had a lot of discussions during these 2 years about how to evaluate the past. And the resistance was huge because people were taking it personally. My idea was that we will speak about the system and not going after personalities, not witch hunting, yes, or how you call. But still, the defense was huge, and there was some commission, but not very effective. Then, after some years, 95, there was Congress, and the only decision we made, because there was no consensus, the only final decision we made to vote. We voted at the Congress of 95 if there was abuse of political psychiatry in Lithuania. And the result of vote was yes. Majority told yes. Then somebody asked to have a second vote on second question, do we regret or apologize? I don't remember exactly. And the result was no. No. Because it was again some defense, because if we tell that we regret and apologize, they will come after us and tell, now you are prosecuted or perpetrators or so on. So, yes, it was abuse, but we don't regret, we don't apologize. This has nothing to do with us. Just so.
I remember, I think he was there in 1994. We organized with Glusman a conference in Kiev about political abuse of psychiatry. And so there were representatives from many of the republics discussing the origins and how it worked and how many cases. And I remember one of the guys got up, Roman Yevsekniev, who was president of the Belarus Psychiatric Association, and said, Robert, I am very happy to announce that we did an extensive investigation and not one dissident in Belarus was hospitalized for political reasons. And I answered, well, yes, Roman, but there were no dissidents in Belarus. The only Belarusian dissident was sitting in Moscow. And so he started laughing because he understood, of course, that he was kind of making a joke. But the guy who was in Moscow, Mikhail Kukobaka, actually spent 7 years in psychiatric hospital. So even in that case, he was wrong. So how does Lithuanian psychiatry now look back on this period?
Since last 10 or 15 years, no signs of, idea of reflecting. I am not very happy. As first president, also I would like to have more psychiatric association to take more to address the system, because we have 6,000 people in these residential institutions, which means that we deprive these people of liberty. And when I raised several times to leaders of association, the answer was that it's not our problem, because these are hopeless patients who are removed from health system to social care system. So we work with perspective patients, so the quite cynical answer, I think.
Any questions? Yes? Can we have a microphone?
I have a question in the same conversation you were carrying on. What do you think about these people right now? If the Russians are here, what these so-called psychiatrists gonna do then? Your fellow psychiatrists.
If the Russians come, what will psychiatrists do?
Ką tie kolegos darys, kai rusai čia bus?
I'm not clairvoyant. I try to see future, but usually I fail. I really cannot comment. I think it's up to each of us to think about this. What shall we do? What should we do? Not only psychiatrists, everyone.
Tanya, can we have over there, Sonika?
Just a short thought. maybe not so short, but a thought to share. I often thought about what happened in the Soviet times, in totalitarian times, in the Soviet system, and as Robert has mentioned very fittingly, that was use of psychiatry for political reasons, and the tragic and the very, very sad aspect of it was that, in my opinion, was that some frailties of human, I'm not a psychiatrist or even a medical doctor, so forgive my difficulty quite defining. What I want to say is that some frailties of human nature were exploited, in my opinion, by the KGB, who found the right vehicles in some of the Soviet psychiatrists who were willing to create, like, for example, the concept of sluggish schizophrenia, or some other ways of dealing with the deviants, with the people who would not want to fit exactly in the Soviet ideological system. We have such examples in the past, even in the 19th century. The famous example is Pyotr Chadaev, who was also proclaimed insane. Sakharov was proclaimed insane, but not by the system itself, by several members of the highest establishment. The president of Soviet Academy of Sciences, for example, Alexandrov, himself a scientist, publicly declared Sakharov insane in an interview to Newsweek, which was a shock in the world. I remember in the 1980s when Sakharov was already in exile. So to isolate, even if they are not incarcerated, Sakharov was, strictly speaking, he was under administrative exile. He was not in a prison, in a camp. He was not under investigation like Bukovsky was when he was considered a potential crazy man. And of course, the cruel part of, so there was some devious truth to this type of how shall I say it, invention, because these frailties of human character, or perhaps psyche, or general constitution, psychological constitution, were exploited by the KGB, and of course by the cynical doctors who, in my opinion, have betrayed their Hippocratic oath to care for a patient and to help him become healthy again, even if he were not, strictly speaking, mentally ill. So, and of course, the other side of this situation in the under the Soviet totalitarian system was that you could keep such a person indefinitely instead of giving him a term and putting him in a camp where he might have even people who would become his friends and who would give him moral support, but put them in a very cruel situation like they did with Leonid Plush and Viktor Nikipelov. And unfortunately, in the case of Viktor, it has been devastating effect, and he was a different man after psychiatric hospital, a man who was extremely pure, honest, noble, very strong character, became an invalid and passed away fairly soon after he was released and left the Soviet Union. So this was obviously, a very underhanded, cynical system that corrupted the people who were supposed to be doctors, and of course caused great harm to the people who were subjected to this treatment. I just wanted to share my thoughts because I've been thinking about it for quite a while, a long time ago, many years.
So before I give you the floor, there's one case, the head of the 5th Directorate of the KGB, Philip Bobkov. So at a certain moment about Sakharov, about Andrei Dmitrievich, he said, the perversity of the Western campaign is that he is mentally ill. We would like to treat him, but because he has such a support from the West, we cannot put him in a psychiatric hospital and help him with his mental illness. Danius, you have a last remark?
I very much agree with your comments, and just want to add that I think partly it's a problem of psychiatry, global psychiatry, which enjoys power, and the less democracy, the more close psychiatry, like religion maybe, like we see in Russia, what happens with the religion, church, and the same with psychiatry, because psychiatry is one of religions. So, and then in case there is problem with democracy, all people who are, let's say, special or unusual, or like Bernard Shaw told, there are two groups of people, reasonable and unreasonable. Probably if you translate unreasonable in our languages, it will be something like, I don't know how you translate it. Unreasonable sounds like crazy. And then Bernard Shaw tells, this is why, and the first group wants to adapt, and the second group wants to change the world according to how they see. This is why all the progress in the world is up to unreasonable people, which are diagnosed as mentally ill.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Danius. I would like to finish this session. You have a last remark? Okay, go ahead.
Fields, The case of the Romes Calanta, my opinion, was one of the heroic. It's my opinion, my dear. As yours is very big, letters. What I'm thinking about it, because I'm from Kaunas, as yourself, sir, inside of me. Yeah, I was 24. I start to work in the institute, not psychological, I'm sorry, doctor, all the time psychology and brain. I work in the butter and milk industry institute. It was Gniezdo, can I say it in English? Nest of the former nationalist in Soviet terminology. Opinion about what is the sequences, why the reaction, who and why they make it. It means power. Blessed. You're absolutely right. They started with these cases. We have it on the TV, on radio, on Voice of America, on Liberty. We have it from the eastern part of the world. And time to time, they started in the Romania after the Czech Republic, 1968. It was Jan Palach. It was explosion in the society, really. It was something in the Europe, walkable. It was on the street. In Kaunas, someone is firing. It was rumors, nothing in the press, you know it very well. Nothing, never, people to people, contact to the contact. Youngs and hippies, the one group, the other, as my scientists and my friends, as the other one group. Something wrong, What is wrong? Wrong with this power, with Soviet Union, wrong with this communist, I'm sorry. who is here former maybe. There are time to time still sitting. And they have the, can I say it, procedure, book for action, as usually KGB open the table, and they have A, B, C, D scenario. Scenario A. Scenario A was used in the Kaunas, because he was fired on 18, the commission was later. On 17, the people and your friends in the house, in the Viliampoli, it was surrounding with the KGB agent, inside of the groups, outside of on the streets, everywhere in Kaunas, and everyone, can I say it, factory or point, you know, or institute. It was really scenario to have the pressure on population. The platoon of the inner voice, внутренние войска, I don't know this term.
Internal army.
Internal army was here. They came to the Kaunas. They're not domestic. The militants, the Komsomol дружинники, the labor forces, you know it in Czechoslovakia, it was also. I don't know this terminology, I'm sorry, in English. And we know, all of us, we know this. And when you start to go to come, what they do? They protect the Ispolkom, now it's Mary House, with whom? Some of them was militant, some of them were soldiers with the banana and the boots, you know, it's difference between the pantoffel and the special kerza. And after you are starting all archives with the number 2, number 3, number 5, we talk in your book, you know. This is from the KGB archives. Mm-hmm. They were ready to do it, and they do it. How long? Maybe after the commission, it was published, the first commission, it was published, a small article in the Kaunas, I don't remember, Tesa, Arkastambu, Kaunas, Tesa, не знаю как. Oh, communistic newspaper. And after it was a little bit crazy. He was crazy. He was writing gasoline 72, it was mark of the gasoline. You remember it also. And me, I remember here. It was scenario of action. We are not talking about if he was ill or not. We are talking why. Kodėl? Jis buvo prieš valdžią. He was against this power, against the Soviet Union. As the Palach, as the other ones in the Soviet so-called communistic bloc. I'm sorry, it's enough.
Thank you very much for this final remark. I would like to thank all the speakers of today. I would like to thank the interpreters. You see one interpreter sitting in the booth. That's Lithuanian. There are 2 interpreters that you don't see sitting because they're sitting in Kiev, Dmitry Shkroba and Sergei Sizenko, who are translating for us into Ukrainian. Unfortunately, not here with us today, but have been with us for the past 30 years. And we will keep on meeting with them and hopefully also here. We will restart tomorrow at 9:30. We have a reception here. And then you are all invited to join us at 7 o'clock across the street in the big hall, the grand hall of Vytautas Magnus University, for the concert Après une rêve, of which you find the papers on the table. Right, so it's a concert by the choir Lietuva and by Alexei Bodvinov from Odessa, who will be performing for Ukrainian refugees, volunteers, and us. Thank you.